I first fell in love with food when I experienced the joy of just cooking for others and cooking for myself. I put everything that I have into it. It's been a beautiful progression, coming up the ranks within the kitchen. I always like to sort of note the milestones. I celebrate my determination. I'm a hard worker and I really just push through a lot for the things that I really believe in.
Chef Katie Sparks is here, and what's different about this is that it's healthy meals, right?
It's healthy. We're sourcing impeccably beautiful raw materials. Red quinoa with walnuts, which are really healthy. We have a nutritionist on board who vets everything. She tells me, Katie, I know you love to put cheese in everything, but you have to back it off a little bit. It's a little too much sodium. We're doing really chef-crafted food from great local ingredients in season, so we're really careful to follow the season.
I'm Nama Tamir, co-owner of Lighthouse in Brooklyn and Lighthouse Outpost in Manhattan. And our values are around feeding people food that is good for them, that is nutritious and healthy, but also delicious in a fun atmosphere. That it's a safe place for our staff, for our guests. It's part of the reason why we picked the name Lighthouse. It's about treating the environment properly. It's really a more mindful, holistic endeavor, and
Her name is Diana Tandia, and she's bringing her history and vision to a menu unlike any other in New York City.
The way I was raised with African, from young age, we teach us like nothing come easy. You need to work hard. Coming here, being an immigrant, wanting to make a better life for me, really keep me going every morning. I cook from the heart. Whatever you put on your plate, that's that energy you give to people. And it's very important to me. Being in the kitchen, I was always led by men. And being a woman, I think it's about time for us to show we are talented.
I'd say like great performances is infinite, creative, fabulous.
There's no carbon copy for the things that we do.
Great performances is dynamic. We are an industry leader, and that means that we have to be dynamic in terms of setting the trend. We are the company that everyone looks at and says, ooh, look what they're doing. I want to do what they're doing.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and I want to welcome you here to East Harlem. It is really a beautiful day, beautiful fall day, or maybe it's not fall yet. In a couple of days it'll be fall. I want to thank you so much for coming to our Food Policy for Breakfast seminar series. I also want to welcome you here to Hunter College in East Harlem. My name is Charles Plackett, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hunter College New York City Food Policy Center and a nutrition professor here. Today we have three outstanding panelists discussing women in food, restaurant and food culture, gender equal pay, sexual harassment, sustainability, career advancement, and more. All critical topics in today's food policy world. Powerful, smart, savvy, approachable, friendly, kind, and humble. They're just a few words I use to describe today's moderator. She is the founder of the country's foremost catering company, Great Performances, and the nonprofit The Sylvia Center, and these are just a few of her numerous accomplishments. And yes, she's the one that's responsible for the annual Latka Festival that takes place every year in Brooklyn. Please, let's give a warm welcome to Liz Newmark. And she will take it from here.
You know, it's funny we talk about Latka because I just recruited Charles to be one of our judges this year. So I hope you'll all join us on December 16th. And thank you for convening this and so many other important dialogues for us in the city. So we're going to start with asking our panelists to tell them a little bit about yourself. But what I want to say is we all have your bios, so maybe there's something you want to include that we don't know about you. Maybe something that nobody knows about you. Katie?
Oh boy. Well, Liz is right. I mean, I'm a chef. I've been a chef for a long time. But I recently moved out of New York City, where I'd been living for close to 30 years, to move to Woodstock, New York. And so that's been, and it's only 2 years. It's taken 2 years to learn how to live in the rest of America, if you will. I mean, I have a car. I've been putting excessive mileage on it because you really can't walk anywhere. So I feel like the biggest news for me is I've transitioned from being a New Yorker to somebody who lives outside of New York, whatever you want to call that. And it's really been eye-opening. It's made me more humble about the challenges that most people face in food sourcing. Not that there's not great food in the Hudson Valley, there is, but you kind of have to work for it a little bit harder. I've become someone who shops at supermarkets. I was always a Park Slope Food Co-op member. And it's just, it's been eye-opening as far as how non-chefs interact with our food system. So that's sort of what I've been up to.
Hello. Better. Hi, my name is Camille Becerra. I'm a chef in New York. I'm been opening restaurants and developing concepts and seeing them through for a long time. Prior to that, I was a young cook, also in New York City. Something maybe you don't know, I'm currently on hiatus, so I'm not working in a restaurant right now. And for reasons that we can talk about at some point, they do have a lot to do with the way that I was treated and the way that I was not paid and etc. So before I became sort of this bitter person, I decided to take a break and understand what it means to be a chef outside the kitchen. I think in this day and age, everyone, a lot of people are chefs without that traditional sort of steps that I had to take, and a lot of cooks, young cooks, we understood that you work and you come up the ranks, and through that time you develop your craft and your understanding of leading a kitchen, and then you become a chef. And now it's changed. Now there are so many chefs, and a lot of times they haven't even entered the restaurant. So a lot was going on, and I decided just to take a moment to develop myself as a chef outside of the restaurant.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. Nama Tamir. I run 2 restaurants along with my brother. You probably don't know this, but I grew up in Israel, and in the military I was a drill sergeant. I don't run my restaurant that way at all, but it is in the background.
I'm sure it's in your DNA. I know that Army well. So we're going to talk about women's issues in food, but we're also going to try to incorporate women's perspective about food, because we're not limited or restricted to our issues in terms of what we want to talk about. But we will start with that because I think a lot of people want to hear about your experiences and talk about this landscape. So going back to 2018, there was so much coverage about sexual harassment in the kitchen. And Kim Severson, I'll quote her, she said, "The emotions involved were stronger than any I had come across since I started writing about food 20 years ago." So there's sort of 3 general questions I'd like to pose and get your perspective on. How has the Me Too movement changed your work? And Camille, you sort of went into that a little bit. Do we think the restaurant culture is or will change? And just wondering, this next generation that's coming up behind all of us, how will it be different for them? So we can park that, and maybe Nama, you could talk a little bit about how the Me Too movement has impacted, if it has.
I think for us at Lighthouse it really hasn't, because I've worked in the industry for so many years along with my brother in most places, and when we opened Lighthouse, the mission was to change the paradigm of what it means to be a restaurant in this environment, and we set up to do things so much in the opposite way of what we have seen in the past, and it was about transparency and love and warmth and creating a second home, because I always felt like New York can be a little bit cold when I moved here and I studied, and we wanted to have a place that was welcoming and loving and an extension of hosting someone in your home. And that was, if you've never been to Lighthouse, the kitchen isn't even open. It's essentially an island in the restaurant. And so the bar has no boundaries. We talk to our staff about, we're all here to do the same thing, which is feed people good food, support people that are growing good food, enjoy everything with the diners. We talk about it being a human-centric endeavor, so there's no separation between someone walking down the street and they have the impact of soil and air and water, and it really is this very mindful, bigger thing. So when the movement started, I thought, I'm grateful for all of its Sitting Light, but we had started that way of thought just from wanting something different for our lives.
That's right. Camille, do you want to jump in?
Yeah.
Just also to speak to, do you think the industry can change?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it can. I mean, I have seen a lot of change from, being a young cook. I would go to all these restaurants that I dreamed about working at, and I wouldn't get hired. And the people that did hire me were women chefs or women-owned restaurants. And guess what? They were vegetarian restaurants generally at the time. I'm talking about mid-90s. So I, in hindsight, it did give me the platform now because my food is very much based on wholesome eating. And so it kind of worked out for me. But I think that absolutely it can change. I think there's so much change happening. And it's about just being kind to each other and working together. And it's a process.
Do you see the next generation then having an easier time, not facing the issues you faced?
Yeah, I think it's a process. I don't necessarily see that already changed. I think there is a lot of undercurrent of what women can do or should do, or how they're treated and talked to. But I do see there being a much better way of working.
So the same question about, what I've always seen is that gender, of course, plays a role, but it seems to be a power differential that certain kinds of people exploit. So it often is a young woman who seems to be like, for somebody who doesn't have great, modeling on how to manage people, can often dismiss or put in a position that's not fast-tracked for growth. But it's also people's comfort level. And where I experienced this sort of gender divide the most in my career was the financial support. So in the mid to late 90s, I was having my it moment, and I still couldn't find funding to open my own restaurant. So I just felt sort of marginalized. Like I was celebrated in the press and people loved my restaurant, they loved my food, but when the restaurant closed, the radio silence. Not one person who used to come to the kitchen door and say, I love your food, let me know when you're ready to open another restaurant, just went away. And I think that has changed. I think there are more women entrepreneurs in food. You've been a leader in this for so long and a model for so many. It takes a special kind of self-confidence in New York City to open a business, and I think women are really seizing their moment now. And I love the Me Too movement. I think it's long overdue, it's incredibly important, and it's incredibly important for anyone to speak their truth, whether they feel heard or not. It's not really about the response. It's really about just getting it off of our chest, We just don't need to carry it. Any negative feeling of injustice or shame or anything, I just think we need to not carry it. It's not our burden.
It's still from my perspective, what I see after all these years is the hospitality industry, food service industry remains very male-dominated. And it's not really a big surprise. And we do see change. What's super important, even in a male-dominated culture, is that everybody be treated with respect. So, there's really two sides to that. One of the things we were talking about in looking at today was the rise of tech and food. And here, tech is another historically, guess what, male-dominated. Do you have any insights into the tech food world changes? Do you see people involved, women involved? So just curious if you could shed any light on that, any of you.
Well, I think in general, I think until women have the same amount of money as men, we aren't going to be equal. There is always going to be this weird thing that happens. And I think that as women, it's really important to come to a point and understand that we have to really support women, and not only financially, but also as mentors. We have to sort of do our work right now, because in history, this is the closest we've ever been to being equal.
So we talk about quality of life issues. Connected to Me Too is this growing conversation about ethics in the restaurant, specifically restaurant, a little bit food service, living wages, other pay-related benefits, mandated sick leave, paid vacation, paid parental leave, humane treatment of workers, which you think shouldn't be an issue, but it is. And even, there's conversations around animal rights and this whole movement. How can policymakers, the public and restaurateurs, which includes the three of you in the food industry, how can you work to bring these three different groups together? Is there alignment? And using the gender impact as a backdrop to this. Katie?
Yeah, there definitely is alignment, but we have to be careful, I think, all of us as consumers and restaurant goers, to not put so much burden on a restaurant that they can't operate. We've shrunk the margins anyway over the years. And one of the things that really has made restaurateuring hard is I think the social media commentary, the constant observation and people sharing, I loved it for this, I hated it for that, and it adds a layer of difficulty to an already difficult business. So I guess what I would say is try to enjoy your restaurants and support them, and not necessarily have this litmus test of virtue to everything that they do, because it's becoming operationally nearly impossible. I've had way too many colleagues leave the restaurant business in New York City because they can't do it anymore, just on a structural level. All the costs are going up, and consumers don't want to pay more, so the squeeze is, on the restaurateur operator, and it's taken a lot of the fun out of it. So I guess for me, there's layers to restaurants too. There's your neighborhood place where you stop and get a burger. There's the culinary, creative, artistic place. There's the convenience place. I mean, they exist on this whole continuum of what their function is and what they were designed to do. I think it's important to have expectations that are appropriate for the price point. So if someone is charging a $30 entree, it's absolutely fair to expect that they sourced sustainably and with ethics and all that. But at the $18, $19 price point, it's harder for them, because these growing parameters and ethical considerations add layers of cost. So it's just important that we kind of have an understanding of who can do grass-fed local and who probably can't, and not make a huge value judgment about it. We have the choice to dine where we want to, and those are very broad categories. It's not that you can't have a grass-fed burger for $12. You can, but then we're talking usually about scale to make up for the lack of profit margin.
Now, you're the operator right now in the group. With all these new rules and regulations affecting labor, how is that affecting you, and what are your thoughts about it?
Katie was absolutely right. The margins have been shrinking. We have started from a higher wage point, and we have been doing a lot of these things previously, because again, it was part of our mission to run the restaurant that way. I also agree with the whole commentary about diners and Yelpers and all of that has made it difficult, but I also feel like there is room for much improvement, you know, and along with the A for your kitchen cleanliness and everything that rolls with that, there should be a requirement for better conditions for cooks, for breaks, and making sure that people don't work doubles on doubles and endless hours and are treated well. I feel like I've worked in so many places that pride themselves on sourcing properly, but feeding their staff a different kind of chicken, a different kind of vegetable, you know, the same pasta every day. And so I think if you believe in a healthy food system, you should believe in a healthy food system for the people that eat it day in and day out and work with you and for you. It's hard to understand how can that change happen in a policy kind of way, but I think diners definitely should inquire about what kind of place it is that they're eating in. I think the best way to see the world change is vote with your dollars. A couple of years ago, we actually started a movement with Unilever called Fair Kitchens, and there's a code of honor, and it's just about treating people in the back of the house properly. And I think there is a real difference when someone comes into work and they enjoy what they do and they're properly paid for it, and they have time for themselves and they can speak freely, and the food just tastes better. The atmosphere is better. When you walk into some places and your server just seems oppressed. Maybe it's an operator point of view, and I have a little bit more of a keen eye for these type of things, but for me it's just very important that the place feels right, that the staff feels like they're at home, more than having microgreens on my plate or having something different as part of the experience.
You know, that's a great segue, because part of the ethos of the hospitality world has always been, you know, the customer's always right, and it's a very male-dominated landscape, and checks are typically paid by the guys. So it really puts a lot of performance into the server realm. And is the customer really always right? Do we have to, as female servers, behave and thinking about that tip, you know, that is structurally built into restaurant? You know, what do you think about no tipping, and how is your approach to some of these issues? Camille, do you want to weigh in?
You know, as a restaurant person, I've always really tried to lead by example, and whether that be the food that I put out or how I treat my staff. I think that I've always, you know, there are difficult people, and in a city as big as New York, you are going to get some people that aren't necessarily fair in the way that they treat others. And so I think that having this connection with your staff, you know, I've always sided on my staff. I've always listened to them, and I think that's really important, to be supported as a worker by your team.
Katie, no tipping. How do you look at all that?
I like the tipped environment, I have to say. There's something, I think there's an engagement between the server and the diner, and I don't know, maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but I like it. I feel like it adds some energy to the interchange, and I'm sure it can be abused sometimes, but in my experience it hasn't really been. So I think it's, to Camille's point, it's really, it's about management and how do you support your team. I think the onus really falls on, I mean, my first story, one story I want to tell, my first restaurant out of culinary school was a place called Al Forno in Providence, Rhode Island. And it was run by a husband and wife team. And Joanne ran the front of the house, and she didn't suffer fools, these people who can be difficult. And the wait times for a table, a 30-seat restaurant, were sometimes so extreme that people would be inebriated by the time they were actually seated. So it happened more than once that if someone was belligerent to her staff, she would walk over to the table, she would pick up the knife, she would pick up the fork, and she says, "You're done." And they would just leave. They would just be asked to leave. And I think there's a point to that. It's like, when you know that your staff is being mistreated, there's no room for that. There's no room for that. And I do think it's ownership or management who should have an eagle eye on the floor, seeing who's being inappropriate, and they should be asked to move on.
Quickly, as far as the no tip, that is so controversial in so many ways, and I never worked in an establishment that had that policy, the no tip policy, and I was always very curious about it and how would that sort of alleviate a lot of financial burdens that one comes up with. I will say that since it was implemented, a lot of people who started decided not to do it, and I'm always very curious as to why that happened. But Danny Myers still has that, and you go into his restaurants and everyone's always really caring and gentle and thoughtful, and so it's a mystery to me. I don't know what that is.
I think on one hand it's good to be Danny Meyer, and it's good to be in a Danny Meyer restaurant. Nama, what's your experience like?
We looked at the no tipping, sort of build a little financial plan if we were to do that, and it seemed financially impossible, and also makes your menu prices look extremely high. And I think there really should be a shift culturally with diners, just understanding that everything is wrapped into the bill. And to your point, I do feel that diners want really great food, great pricing, delivered to home, and not always willing to kind of like understand that for all of that to happen, fair wages and whatnot, it has to be shown in the pricing as well. So it is just a difficult thing. I think Danny Meyer has the ability and the financial background and advisor to sort of help him go through that, but a lot of restaurants that have gone that way went back. It's just very hard to include all of it in your price point, and I think diners are just so alarmed when they see a $50 entree or something in that nature, even though that ends up potentially being the price of it all. It's just very jarring on the menu. And then as far as the supporting your staff, I mean, I have had many conversations with diners that are unhappy with some part of the experience, and I said, this is, for us, it's a job and we do our best, and if you feel like we failed you, then I am terribly sorry, but I'm sure that had happened to you at your job at some point, and your entire industry didn't get the memo that you had a bad day and that you did something wrong. And so I think we forget sometimes that we try our best, and sometimes something can go wrong, and there is a level of humanity and beauty in the fact that we go in and there's some dynamic thing. It would be awful to go into a restaurant where everything is perfect all the time. I remember going to 11 Madison Park years ago, and my favorite part about that whole experience was that they poured a Manhattan into an old Gin Martini glass, and just that one moment, you could see that they were talking to each other with their eye. And so even when you're having this, immaculate experience, it's the human part that is just so special, and we should really cherish that and not have these like insane expectations of restaurants.
Yeah, I'd like to think that that's the female side of the industry coming out and thinking more about humanity. And yes, we're entrepreneurs and we think about the bottom line, but perhaps as women we have a double or a triple bottom line. And so, we start taking over hospitality and then the world, and everything will be much better. It's kind of simple. But anyhow, let's talk about the media for a second. And the media is a enormous, outsized, and social media presence in the food restaurant world. And the media highlights creativity and innovation, And they also highlight this whole issue around equality, equity, sexual harassment. Is the media doing a good job? And do women have equal exposure on the good side? And Camille?
Yeah, well, just like there's more women in kitchens, there's more women in media, and they're covering, for a long time. I opened this little restaurant in Soho, 2013, and it was really successful, and all these celebrities would come, but I would never get the New York Times to review me. And we had the best PR, and I was just like, why isn't this happening? Like, why aren't they? And I would see that no woman got reviewed in the past 2 years. So I said something, and I knew that when I said it, I wouldn't ever get reviewed. But you know what? The next year, they reviewed 3 women, and one of them got 3 stars. So, not to say I did it, but there is a change happening, and sometimes you just have to put yourself out there and just take the hit, if that's what it means. I knew I wasn't going to be very popular for saying that in some circles, but on the flip side, though, we had social media, and they really loved my restaurants and the things that we were creating. So it balanced out for me, and I feel like I was very lucky in that regard.
Katie, you've seen the media continuum over more than a decade. Can we ask you to share comments?
Well, yeah, I think the media, it depends on if you're talking about print media, people like the big ones, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, people like that. I think they've held a fairly steady disposition, I would say, toward women, which is, since there are fewer of us, I think they get less coverage, but I think that's, in a sense, okay. It's a proportionate sort of coverage. What I don't like is being constantly referred to as a woman chef. And I have mixed feelings about that because, of course, I won the Food and Wine Best Chef Award for the New York region in 1998, and I'm pretty sure, I think I'm pretty good, but I'm pretty sure it was the fact that I was a woman helped me win that. So there have been definite benefits to being a woman in the food industry, especially in the 90s when there were fewer. But I feel like now it would be maybe more helpful just to take that moniker, that descriptor off the table, because we're doing the same job as men. We have the same pressures, we have the same stresses, and increasingly the same opportunities. So it might just be time to just not carve that out for our profession.
Well, that's a segue to another food for thought, as we say. Anthony Bourdain said he questioned the purpose of award categories specifically geared to women. He said, why at this point in history do we need a best female chef designation, as if they were curiosities? Should we have categories for men and for women? Is it insulting? Is it good?
Well, I'm Israeli, so very hard to insult me in general, but I think of myself as a strong person. I don't think of myself as a strong woman. I'm definitely not insulted by it, but I think it has no room. I think that we should just be, and female chefs are chefs, as are male, as are immigrant chefs, and we shouldn't have all these funny categories. I think Daniela Soto Inez just won Best Female Chef, and I thought to myself, she's just a great chef. So I agree with Anthony Bourdain and Katie.
Sorry, but at the James Beard, is there a woman and a male category? No, but yet
sort
there's
of regular and pastry.
Right, but yet, right. But at the Grammys, we have that, right? So is this the and the Oscars, and is this the does food have the opportunity to change that, to kind of set the path and be an example and not have those categories? maybe.
It's interesting because I don't know where I come out on the conversation. There's a best over. I don't know. You know, there's so many exclusions in our industry, and I think we do need to recognize the farmers, the immigrants, you know, the dishwashers. You know, so many of these small elements that really, you know, we stand on whose shoulders we stand to make anything successful. So it was a good question. So thank you, Charles, for that. Health and wellness are giant industries, and I think you've all talked about health and healthy eating, wellness. I don't know if that has more of a female roots in our industry, or if guys would have come to that on their own. But there definitely are different profiles on eating. But they're absolutely mainstream. How do you see that folding and continuing to evolve and influence the food industry? Maybe a little bit on a broader level. You know, Katie, that's really sort of been where you started and been talking about it for a long time.
Thank you for asking that question. I mean, I actually think we're poised and primed to come full circle, or at least the pendulum swinging back toward cooking as a cultural expression and less as food as medicine. I mean, I've never ascribed to the food as medicine idea. I think that does disservice to both medicine and food. Food is about sharing, it's about community, it's a way of transmitting information, just like genetic information, but it's knowledge of culture. It's a way of connecting, and I actually want to spend more time cooking, and I want my friends and my loved ones to spend more time cooking, because I feel like it's, when you spend more time with anything, you become more intimate with it, you become more knowledgeable of it. And my son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum when he was 5, and from that moment on, I started to learn about the gut microbiome and how that affects everything. And I just want to say I could get very lost in the weeds here, but diversity of what we eat equals the diversity of our gut microbiome, which leads to more resilience in our organism. So if I can leave you with one thought is, as many diverse species that you can eat, the better. As many different colored vegetables, like carrots don't have to just be orange, they can be purple, they can be white, they can be, so I'm eating a lot of purple potatoes this fall because they've been amazing and delicious. But just all these things, different, because we breed plants and animals to be effective for the market, to commodify them, to make sure that they're a good price point for the producer, they're shelf stable. So they're a product, right, that gets traded, that gets stored. If we go deeper and closer to the source and have all these different breeds of plants and animals, we're eating things that have a much more robust vitality themselves, immune system. So these animals that have been grass-fed and treated, as ruminants that they should be, or wild-caught fish, these are animals that have aggregated a life force into themselves. They haven't been passively fed and standing around. They've been vital. I really strongly believe that vitality gets passed to us through the food. And so I would just encourage everyone to cheat a little time away from other things and spend more time on the sourcing, just that vital, gorgeous, lively, vibrant food.
Early on I had a background in vegetarian and macrobiotic cuisine. So I do believe that food is healing. And I agree with Katie in that cooking is also very healing. I always thought if everyone knew how to cook, the world would be such a different place. Because of that act, you're feeding yourself, but also you're taking care of others in a way, and sharing and eating with others, and that's so healthy and so important. But I think that, in many ways, during the industrialization of America, we lost a lot of these ways of cooking and foods that our ancestors were in knowledge of, and we lost a lot of that. And from that we have vegetables that are overbred, etc. And all these diseases developed. And I think that, in understanding these wonderful foods that were kind of stripped from us, and we were forced to eat this more sort of unlively food, that in that coming back, we're starting to understand the power of food. Food can be medicine, but it is so much more than that. And I'm just so happy that as a culture we're starting to really understand and take care of our planet. And I think if anything's gonna help the planet, it's food.
And it's just, Nama, I don't know if you want to weigh in, but let me just use the filter of our gathering also. Is there any gender component to this, or is this, I mean, it's above gender, this is human, I understand, but in terms of impact and influence?
I mean, I imagine as women, we sort of have a little bit more pressure to be thin and look good than men do, and I think a lot of us grow up with paying attention to what we're eating a little bit more, and so I think that probably has something to do with it. I know that when I moved here, food tasted different than it did back home. I had to understand the food system in a new way, and Lighthouse is definitely an extension of that. I remember going out to eat and feeling almost hungover from food. It was so saturated with sugar and salt, and we've just trained our palates to these new highs that are not realistic. And if you just eat a really great tomato, it tastes wonderful if you're used to that. And so I think I'm very welcoming of this new wellness trend in food. I think food should taste good when you're eating it and feel great the next day. And it really is sort of time to go back to like energizing yourself with food and loving it. And we have this like orthorexia, and people have become so infatuated food, but also scared of it in a sense. And it's really odd to see some, from a restaurateur point of view, how what reactions people have sometimes to a menu. Like it's very personal, it's very rigorous, and I think sharing food is just the healthiest, most beautiful thing to see. When families come in and they're all eating together, it's just a beautiful thing, and you can tell that they're happy and healthy. There's just something unspoken about it.
That's great.
It's marketed to women. At the end of the day, it's like, that wellness adaptogenic thing comes in a pink package. So, I mean, there has to be some change there.
And that's also because women predominantly are shopping and cooking and preparing. So, but it should appeal to, it should be gender neutral. No question about that. And it's interesting because we're talking about gender issues, we're talking about Me Too, harassment, this whole sort of explosion of stories the last 2 years. A long time ago when I started, and as I grew up in the industry, the real gender issues were about, gosh, how's it like to be a working mom? What's the life balance that you have in the industry? And it really seems that that's been eclipsed by these more, sort of flamboyant issues. But I think at the end of the day, for working mothers, it's still about balance. What do you see in your experience that sort of lets us know what's going on in terms of work-life balance for working moms or working women?
We haven't had a mom work at Lighthouse for a really long time. I think it's a tough industry to be working at if you have children. If we do, they're usually prep cooks, so they work in the during the day. You would have to have a very supportive husband, I think, at home with the kids for that to be the case.
I was a single mom throughout my career. My daughter just turned 18. And I'm just like, oh my God, I made it. We did it. We were never homeless. We had little bouts of poverty, but we made it. I am from here. At times in my career, I lived with my cousin for some time, and she helped us out. I also lived with a dear friend. So, because I was a single mom. But I also had family nearby who helped. If it wasn't for that, I don't know where I would really be. I would have a very different career. Very hard, you know. My priorities were being a mom and working, so didn't have time for relationships. And, you know, I missed out on that because that's really an important part of, you know, of life, is having that partner that you can just talk to and not feel these, not kind of carry the stuff. So, so therapy worked at times because I needed to tell someone. I couldn't just hold it all in. So yeah.
I'll tell you, as a married working mom, something had to go. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it was the spouse who, what spouse? You know, so I don't know that that's indigenous to the food industry, probably even a little bit more because of our nighttime activities. Katie?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's we've not solved for this. This is still an ongoing issue. So my son was born in 2000, and when I was still very pregnant, I just, you know, when you're pregnant, there's two people in one body. It's very convenient. It really is. It's just like you're just carrying this child everywhere. And then when he was born, I realized my life had changed, and I hadn't really planned for it. So I went right back to work after about 6 weeks maternity leave, and I just couldn't keep up. I couldn't keep up with my former self, and so I realized. So there's no perfect solution. It's all like hobbing life together. I felt like that's what it was. It's like, just there's no balance. The notion of balance seems like a completely erroneous metaphor. It's really these little chunks that you're pulling away from something to make the structure kind of hold together, but it's always a little tenuous, and it's very joyful if you have support. And I had support. It did, you know, contribute to a divorce. But that happens to the guys in our industry too. A lot of divorced chefs. It's just endemic to the thing because you're often disappointing lots of people. You're because of your art. Essentially, it is your art, and I sort of equate it to being a jazz musician or something. You jazz musicians have to go on the road. They have to go find their people. We as restaurant people. We set up shop and people come find us, but we have to be there for our people, whether they're our customer or our employees, or we're mentoring people constantly. So there's a lot pulling on us, and I felt badly that I couldn't be. I felt like I did better on the mom piece than the wife piece. I'll put it that way, and just in terms of having the resources to keep that going. But I don't think there's no easy answer there.
And you know, I think it really transcends the food industry. As long as we have a more traditional model with greater burden falling on women and greater burden falling on working moms. So I see it's an issue in every industry, from you know, finance to law or medicine. But I think our obligation, and I say to the audience too, is as we pioneer this new food industry with a greater sense of women participants and a greater female voice, that, you know, there's no reason why you have to be there till 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, it's not brain surgery. It's close, I understand. And our clients are very demanding and they're not anesthetized on the table. But we have to rethink the paradigm a little bit to see how can it change for women. You know, are there other opportunities? I look in my industry and in catering and special events, there is more flexibility. And I have fought the men that I work with all the time to say, no, we're going to carve out, you know, different scenarios for working moms, and we have to do that. Our voices have to be heard, and it's a tough challenge. I know we want to get to Q&A soon. I have one more question that I want to ask each of you, and I only ask this, you know, when because you have full plates and you're juggling a million things. So on top of everything you're juggling, Are there things you're doing to give back to communities or causes you believe in? I wonder if you could share some of that activity with us.
Right now, I'm actually working on a book proposal because I feel like for durability, I've distilled, I've acquired a lot of knowledge. I want to write a book so it's there and it lasts a little bit. So that's how I feel like I can give back. And it's excruciating because I'm not a writer per se. It's like pulling teeth to get a paragraph out of me. But I want to share my knowledge the way that I used to share my cooking skills because I'm not actively a working chef anymore. So I needed to find some way to do that could scale up a little bit. So that's what I'm doing right now.
For so long I didn't have the time or the resources. All I could really do was just be there for a team. I've never said no to like Edible Schoolyard or any of these. There's so many different charities that approach chefs to have a stall or do a plate, and I've always just done that. I never say no to these opportunities as well. That's really important for me. I think now I have a little bit more time, and I've been trying to research. I think would be really great would be to research a homeless women's food shelter and get like 10 women that are into food, whether they be chefs or cooks or just home cooks, and just have this really great sort of team that goes to homeless shelters and helps women. Because that's tough, and I think that but I can't. I reach out to people and no one returns. So if anyone knows about any women's shelters that would like a bunch of guerrilla girls coming in and taking over their kitchen for one day a week or whatever, please let me know.
Yeah, and I can give you, so we could talk about that offline. I mean, I think this whole notion of a city that's overfed, and we talk about homelessness all the time, and just even the question of what the homeless eat really has resonated with me, and I spent time in a shelter, and then that afternoon I came back to my place of work, and there was a tasting going on with customers, and they were, I don't want to tell you the conversation about, was it too hot, too cold, too pink, too white, too green, too blue, too this, too spicy. And I just thought, oh my God. But that's would be fascinating.
We do quite a bit at Lighthouse in terms of all the charity events. I do a lot of talks in schools around sustainability. I call it sustainability plate by plate and conscientious capitalism, and really trying to inspire young minds to think about building more mindful endeavors in their futures and being influential in where they go. Part of the ethos of Lighthouse is to be as least wasteful as possible, and we essentially created our own waste system that it has different channels, and we work with one person that picks up specific things to dye fabrics, and a cosmetic company that uses coffee grinds, and a composter, and so now we are working with the Department of Sanitation and the Parks Department to kind of like scale that to a pilot, because I'd love to see no garbage bags on the street and everything sort of collected on a schedule, and things sort of like having a secondary life. And really, I think it can change the economy, it can change the way we consume things, it can make toxic materials disappear from our world if we really started seeing these waste centers in our cities. If we really start thinking of waste in a different kind of way. Doing that.
That's fascinating. And Katie, I just want to say, if you're having trouble writing, you should just talk and tape yourself and then transcribe it, because
what you shared today should absolutely be in a book. And I just want to say that for all of you, it's so inspiring, and to have you really be the voice that speaks to the next generation is going to be so critical to change in the world, change in this industry, change for women, for men, who also could use some change. And speaking of men.
Thank you, that was really great. We're gonna open up to questions in just a few minutes because I get to do my questions. So there was some stuff I wanted to read that I thought was kind of important. It's been reported that nearly 40% of all sexual harassment charges, that's 40%, are filed by women with the Equal Opportunity Commission. And that is from the restaurant industry, and it's more than 5 times the rate for the general female workforce. So it's pretty rampant. We did a survey just recently, it was just released on restaurant workers, and I just wanted to read some of the key findings. 42%, this is not just for female, it's male and female. 42% of those surveyed worried about losing their job. More than 65% of those surveyed did not have paid vacation days. More than 55% of those surveyed did not have paid sick days. 62% of those surveyed go to work when they're sick. And 78% of those surveyed reported that they sometimes or always work more than 10 hours a day. And 31% had been sexually harassed at their current job. 70% of those who said they were sexually harassed did not report it. I just wanted to read some of those statistics. My first question is for you. I would love to hear in the beginning, there was a story, and I didn't hear it. And I don't know if you're comfortable telling it, but I would love to hear it.
I have so many stories. Which one? Just why I'm not working?
Yes, exactly,
Okay.
and you're taking a break.
Yeah, so I removed myself from environment, I think, throughout this. I was a New York chef, and I was just kind of beat up with how I was treated in the workforce, and also with New York consistently having this situation where they don't allow for restaurants to be sustainable. It's very hard. And we've come up in an environment where people that work in restaurants don't really care about sustainability either. So I removed myself from that. I think I had opened the last 3 restaurants I opened. I was tapped by restaurateurs who wanted to open a restaurant. They're like, we have this and we would like for you to develop the concept. So I go on, I have a contract, develop the concept, it opens, I'm there, then they don't pay me. And in the past four restaurants, I'm owed about $120,000. So I just kind of was like, great. Yes, I can fight it, but I'm also it was a single mom who didn't have the luxury of the time, the energy that it takes, and the money. So I didn't. And these were restaurants that were opening with a lot of attention. And the restaurateurs, for whatever reason, weren't doing their job, and they weren't paying me. So for those 2 reasons, I just removed myself and decided I'm just taking a moment and figuring it out, because there has to be a better way of working, especially someone who's dedicated so much time to a career and to a city. There has to be a better way. So I took myself out of there. I owe a publication, this whole story about why I did it, but I just can't write it yet. Because I'm still in the process of understanding what that is.
Well, we have to get you legal services for free, that's for sure, so you can sue them. Questions?
So do you think that the reason why that happened to you is because you were a woman?
you know, it's always hard to say, but at the end of the day, I was a single mom and I was operating from necessity and almost with a little sprinkling of despair because I had to work. So you know, who knows? Who knows?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for all the great remarks today. I have a question about hiring. I know there's a real sort of staffing crisis across the food service industry in New York. What do you think restaurants in particular can do better to attract and retain talent?
I think essentially treating people better. We've had our cooks, most of them for at least 5 years, some of them 9. When we couldn't afford to pay paid vacation, I was diligently finding productions that would take over the restaurant or something so we could close for a bit and pay everyone. I mean, it's just, you have to love people, right? If you own a restaurant, you have to love people and you have to love your people and pay them well. And it just, you know, you talked about bottom lines, and we call Lighthouse a multiple bottom line business, because I think you're creating a life for yourself. I think, you know, people that have children, their children grow up in the restaurant. I think of Lighthouse as a neighborhood restaurant. You just have to build it all in there, and you have to treat people kindly. You have to feed them well. We you know, at the Fair Kitchen, I just always say that whether it's you or management, you have to. Someone has to be responsible for the team. Someone has to look people in the eyes when they come in. It really just, I think if you do all of those things, if you remember that your staff are going home and they have their families and they have their stresses and all of that fits into what you do every day, then you'll have staff for life. And if we sort of get those young, you know, culinary students that are eager to be chefs, and don't kind of like train them for team working and team building and remembering that there's a person at the end of the plate, then I think that's what we might be seeing right now a little bit.
Yeah, I was just going to say also, there's just a dearth of people between what's going on immigration-wise and the robust nature of hospitality. There are just so many new jobs. So I think we even have to go further downstream and look at going into communities that maybe have not been participating in our industry and start educating, training, really at an earlier point before they're really thinking about hospitality, and open up the world to hospitality to just totally different and new potential groups.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, you know, when we talk about equality in kitchens, you know, sometimes we generally talk about, you know, our higher-ups not being good to us as women. But as a woman, to have to tell the people that work for you, and they're strong men and not used, and that's another side of it, you know? It's very hard at times to be a boss of certain men. So, I mean, but, you know, outside of that, I think that it's, you know, I've had cooks for years and years and years too, and it really is about developing a really personal relationship with them, because at the end of the day, they're sort of my students, and that's how I always think of them. And they're not workers, and they're not my staff, and they're my students. And really, when you're a chef, it's just about teaching.
More questions? I have one question for you. There was an alternative clip that we had from 60 Minutes, and it said that the opening line was basically that restaurants are lawless. It was a waitress talking about the New York City restaurant industry. Could any of you comment on that? The restaurants are lawless?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain restaurants with certain owners that were. I mean, I've heard so many stories about so many chefs, and to see one in particular just come away clean without anything was a real bummer. There are certain restaurants that's how it was, and it was because of the owner, and it trickles down.
The lawlessness, it's interesting because when I read Kitchen Confidential, I was like, that's not the restaurant business I know. So I think it exists on this broad spectrum. Yes, there's the rock and roll bad boys and the rampant drug use and stuff, but that wasn't what I chose. But I think I've always been really firm in my own limitations. So I only worked 5 days a week in the restaurant industry. And I would tell the people that I was, I don't know if it came from my own inherent sense of stubbornness. I hate to not be paid for my work. I've always hated that. I would just hate it so viscerally. So I, no matter what someone had to teach me, I always felt I inherently knew the value of my own labor. So I didn't get hired at a certain place because I said, I need 2 days off. I need to have some life outside of work. I'll give you everything I got on those 5 days, but I have to have 2 days off. And so that just narrowed my possibilities, but I got what I needed by making that stance. And I think sometimes women, we have a very hard time asking for what we need. We're socialized to be very accommodating. And some of the men in my life, I've told them, just because a woman is smiling doesn't mean she agrees with you or that she's happy. Like, you have to understand, a woman's smile can mean 1,000 things. It can mean, boy, I really hate how you're talking to me right now, but I don't feel comfortable saying that. So I think the genders are still learning each other. I think the Me Too movement is helping. I'm so glad that my 19-year-old son is being exposed. I mean, if you say these professions, doctor, pilot, chef, he doesn't think male necessarily. He doesn't know. Is it a female doctor? Is it a female chef? So that's progress in my mind. But I do think on our side of the equation as women, we have to get more literate in talking about finances and talking about schedule. We just have to have firmer, better boundaries. And boy, is it hard. It is hard. I'll never diminish that. But it's the only thing that has given me sanity and peace.
So you guys mentioned how social media has a pressure on women to be skinny. On that same argument, I feel like there's a huge pressure on women to go vegan or vegetarian or eat less meat, whether it be like less fat or less sugar. Do you think that any of those pressures have influenced your relationship with food and your work?
That's a great question, and I've been thinking a lot about it because I just read Nina Teicholz's book on fat, and I think she called it The Big Fat Lie, The Big Fat Surprise. It's a really great book on dietary fat and all the science behind it. My belief system is, and it's somewhat informed, but I'm not a scientist, but I think all the macronutrients, fat, carbohydrates, and protein, we need all of them. We just need them to be of the highest quality. And fat, particularly animal fat, there's definitely vegetable-based fats, but animal fats are where the animals, including ourselves, hold on to all the toxins that we're exposed to. And so if you're going to eat animals and animal fat, I think you do yourself the best. And it's very nutrient dense. Fat is phenomenal. We need it for so many of our mental processes and everything in our body. But we need to eat really good fat. So really, if you're going to eat an animal, think about everything that animal ate. And that's what you're going to be ingesting. So I think it's super important to eat maybe less animal protein, but at the highest level of quality that you can get your hands on.
Thank you all so much for speaking today. It's been really wonderful. I'm trying to think of the best way to articulate my question, but I guess I've been working as a waitress in restaurants since I was like 15 or 16, And something I've noticed is that so many people working on like the waitressing or end of things are working in restaurants out of necessity. And so it's a lot harder to put your foot down and set boundaries, whether it be in terms of sexual assault and harassment or just like being overworked or underpaid when you're literally working because you have to and you have no choice, really. You know, when you are in such a dire position, it's really hard to put your foot down, I think. And I think what you're all talking about in terms of like these really kind and loving spaces is so important. But I guess my question is, how do we make that happen on a larger scale? Because I've worked in a lot of restaurants and I haven't seen any of those environments. And so how do we make that happen more largely? I don't know if any of you have an answer to that, but I would say my experience has been largely negative in terms of not only like my bosses, but also the customers that come in, and then also the experience not only of women, but of trans and non-binary folks, or of people of color in the food industry. Like, it's so different depending on like all of the different privileges you may or may not have. So, thank you.
That was fantastic.
So when I went to Hunter College, I worked on the Upper East Side. And I always say that it really trained me to kill people with kindness. You know, it was a different clientele than anyone I had known before, very privileged. And so you know, there's definitely a sense that you have to maybe succumb to certain things or let yourself be, you know, small and really polite. I used humor to always overcome that. But I think we do have more choices than we believe, and I think there's a little bit of power in organizing. And so if you're in an environment that is unkind, one thing you can do is always find another job and leave, but you can also talk to your coworkers and you know, and say, speak to the owners, speak to the managers, and say, you know, we think that this would work better. We feel like we're not treated well. I would not go the social media route right away, but that's a conversation that also can be held. I mean, I think that businesses are threatened by these type of tools, and so if a place is just very mean, if someone is just mean or abusive, or then you definitely have the tools, and the public is listening, and there's Yelp, and you know that it could be used from within also, if that's a route you feel like is worthwhile taking.
Hello. Yeah. So I think just like it's our responsibility to source out great food and great ingredients for our health, I think that same responsibility should go into the places that you decide to work in. And I think that there's so many restaurants that offer these really nurturing environments. There's so many more that don't. And I think that if we're picky on the restaurants that we work for, there may be this tipping scale where those restaurants with these old practices may not have the staffing that they need, and you know, maybe that's the start.
Yeah, I think to the earlier question about jobs and the dearth of good workers, you know, I don't think any of us minimize how difficult the environment and the landscape is out there, and how unchanged it's been over decades. And you know, that's how I got into my business. We started Great Performances as a waitress service for women in the arts as an alternative to restaurants, because I didn't want any couch auditions. And so a different type of waitress work emerged. And I think there are other opportunities, but there's something that's really fabulous about being in the restaurant world and being a waitress. And to minimize how crappy it is, and to minimize how difficult it is to get your voices heard, you know, it forms like this. It starts talking to your coworkers. It's, you know, it's really easy to say, go talk to your lawyer and have your lawyer call somebody.
But I think thinking about the 10 things that we can do to try to make an impact would be a helpful thing. And maybe that's a great follow-up we can put together, and everybody can weigh in with what is your strategy? What is the advice we could give to you, other than find a new job or or make light of how difficult your situation really is.
Well, on that note, in my mission to end at 10:15 every session, I want to thank you all so much for what a wonderful discussion. Please make sure to check out nycfoodpolicy.org and make sure to sign up for our weekly news digest and go enjoy a beautiful, wonderful day. And let's thank our guests and moderator. We appreciate all your time, and it was very difficult getting this panel organized, and we appreciate you guys.